Hi, folks. Hassan here on the HMA Law Firm channel. Thanks so much for joining us. And today we're talking about a topic that almost all of my clients, many of them anyway, have had to go through, and that is the USCIS interview, the marriage-based interview. So we're assuming at this point that you filed for a green card based on marriage, either to a US citizen or in certain circumstances, a permanent resident. You filed your I-485, you've perhaps gotten your work permit, and you're living together. And now is the time for you all to tell your story to an immigration officer, for them to see how you all live together, how you've joined your lives together, what kind of life that looks like, how you all interact with one another. This is the marriage-based interview. So we're going to talk about things that are common to all marriage-based interviews, no matter where in the country you might have your interview. But be advised, your particular case and your particular local USCIS office might do things a little bit differently. So it's always a good idea, A, to get targeted advice that's based on your case and your case alone, because everybody's case is a little bit different, and also to know what the local procedures are at your local office. Now, I've had the experience of being able to do these types of interviews in USCIS offices around the country. And so over the years, I've developed a sense for what works and what doesn't. And so again, the advice that I'm going to give in this prep session here is applicable to any office, all right? But it's not going to be the complete advice, and you still should talk to your attorney and find out what the local procedures are at the office that you're going to be going to, and certain other things that might be important for your particular case. All right, that being said, you should look at a marriage-based interview as an opportunity, okay? It's okay to be nervous. It's okay to be a little bit scared. It is intimidating to go in front of an immigration officer who holds the power for the rest of your life in the country. And I totally get that. But if you look at it as an opportunity to tell your story and own your own story, you're going to do so much better. That's the first thing in terms of how you look at it. The second thing is you have to be prepared. All right. Most people, the most common mistake that I see are people who are inside their own case, and they know that they're in love with each other, and they know that they've built life together, and they assume that an immigration officer is going to be able to tell that. And sometimes they can, right? But don't presume that that's what's going to happen. Don't bank on that, because if things go wrong and the officer doesn't see what you know inside your own head, then it's going to cause problems. All right. So the important thing to remember here is be prepared. Your attorney's job is to make sure that whatever your story is, however you met, whatever kind of life you lead together, whatever the ups and downs and everything else that you go through together, that is reduced to cold, hard documents that any immigration officer can look at and say, hey, you know what? This one is looks like a legitimate case. No reason to be suspicious about anything. Let me go ahead and approve this one because I have 3 or 4 more so I can go to lunch. That's where you want to be. That's where you want to be. So, and the key to that is preparation and being able to see your case as an immigration officer would. All right. And if you go online, which I don't necessarily advise you to do, but if you go online, you'll get the impression that there's a magic formula, that if you just have X, Y, and Z documents, and then everything will magically get approved. And so people try their best to, as if there's a magic list of documents that's going to get their case approved very quickly. And newsflash, there is no such list. Okay, and the reason is because everybody's story is a little bit different. Now, yes, there are things that you want to include, and that it's a good idea to include. But no one piece of document, no single document is going to make or break your case. All right. Look at this as piecing together evidence brick by brick until you build, an entire building. And that's going to be your case. All right. All right. So let's talk about preparation first, and then we're going to talk about the day of the interview and how to conduct yourself and what type of questions you might want to expect. Okay. But like I said, the key is preparation. All right. If you have been working with an attorney, then hopefully they've advised you, as we do at our firm, to get into good habits from the first time you come in to join your finances together to the extent possible. Make sure that you have proof of living together. It might be a joint lease. It might be a deed with both of your names on it. It can be letters from your landlord if you live sort of in a more informal situation where you're perhaps renting a room or just staying for free with a family member. But the point is whatever you're comfortable doing, you want to get into those habits at the very beginning of your case, so that you're not scrambling at the last minute to try to put together a whole bunch of documents. So if you've done things right, you will have a joint bank account. Look, both of you are going to have bills to pay every month anyway, so it makes sense to open a joint account, funnel whatever money you need to put into that joint account, and pay your joint bills out of that account. That way, every month, guess what? A bank statement comes out, and that's another piece of evidence that you can use. So get into good habits beforehand. And this is going to be different. Sometimes people share cars, sometimes people don't. Sometimes there's health insurance, sometimes people have, and sometimes there's not. Sometimes there's a cell phone bill, and it's easier for one spouse to have their bill with their family because it's cheaper that way, rather than opening up a separate cell phone account and adding their spouse to it. So don't worry about if your situation is a little bit different, or if you don't have one of the common documents. That's what you need to discuss with your attorney to make sure that you put forth the best case that you can. Okay, everyone's case is different. You definitely want to take advantage of pictures. I'm a big believer in utilizing pictures. Some immigration officers don't care about them, and that's fine, but some do. And pictures that span a length of time that show the both of you together doing the things that you like to do. It might be out hiking, it might be going to a show, it might be hanging out with friends, it might be hanging out with family, it might be cooking together. Whatever your life actually looks like, don't be afraid of it. And you're going to hear me say this over and over again. Own your own story, right? Legally, and the reason for that, there's a legal reason for it. Legally, what you're trying to prove by filing the I-130 and the I-45 and going for this interview is that on the date that you got married, you had the intent to establish a life together. That's the legal term, establish a life together. The government does not get to say what that life looks like, right? People sometimes have to live apart. Sometimes they have to leave because of job, because of work, because of a sick relative, providing extended care. But it doesn't mean that they're not married. It doesn't mean that they don't have a life together, right? And if you try to tell an immigration officer what you think they want to hear, then you're going to create problems for yourself. So don't do that. Own your own story, be confident in it, and you'll see the interview is going to go so much easier, and it's not going to get caught up in some of the problems that cause further investigations and referrals to the fraud detection National Security Directorate. You don't want to have your case sent there, all right? And if you try to tell an officer what you think they want to hear, then that's what's probably what's likely to happen. So don't do that to yourself. Own your own story. Everybody has their own story, and sometimes it means the marriage. Maybe you've had trouble with your spouse. Maybe you've gone to see counseling. Maybe you've seen a spiritual therapist or somebody at your church or mosque or house of worship. Whatever your story is, talk to your attorney about it so that they can think of ways to document that. Because again, the government doesn't get to say what your life actually looks like together. Okay, as long as on the day you got married to each other, that you intended to establish a life together. And I can give you example after example of marital relationships that perhaps don't the traditional marital relationships, right? And they still get approved because there was an intent to establish a life together. All right. So don't be afraid of your own story. That's all I'm saying. All right. So whatever your story is, you're going to want to reduce it and join things early on to be able to show that you had that intent to establish a life together. That's how we prove every single case without exception. All right. So hopefully by the time of the interview, you have a fair number of perhaps joint bank statements or cell phone bills or health insurance or car insurance, or perhaps something from work that shows that your spouse is listed as the emergency contact. That's another common one that we see. Of course, joint lease agreements. Tax returns is another big one, showing that you filed married filing jointly. Or alternatively, if you had to file separately, that you filed married filing separately. Pictures, screenshots of social media. One of my favorite pieces of evidence to include in these packages are screenshots of social media, if you happen to be on social media, and it's fine if you're not, because it's really hard to fake having 50 friends commenting on how cute you all look, right? So it's if you have a screenshot from social media, then use that. Use whatever it is that you do. If you've gone on vacation together, you'll probably have an itinerary or something in your email or a receipt that shows that you traveled together. If you traveled internationally, whether this was before you got married or after you got married, there might be passport stamps. You're going to want to make copies of that. If you had tickets to a show on Broadway or something as simple as your local movie theater, you might have a ticket stub or at least proof that you paid for it. If you've given gifts to each other, that's another thing. You can have you can show gift receipts, receipts of gifts, perhaps jewelry or flowers or what have you. Really, the list is endless. And you want to make sure, again, that whatever your story is, the way you all met, the way you all decided to get married to each other, the way you all built your lives together, that needs to come across from the documents. A lot of people ask me, well, should I submit every single bank statement? Should I submit every single cell phone bill? The answer is no. Don't do that. You can collect them if you want to, but in your packet, officers are much more impressed with a smaller number of a wide variety of documentation. So if you have a few cell phone bills, maybe 5 to 10, maybe 15 pictures if you can't stop yourself, one lease agreement, 3 or 4 bank statements that span a length of time, that's much more convincing, much more persuasive than having every single cell phone bill or every single a bank statement, because no one's going to look at all of that. And then the power of your case, it comes in, it's almost like less is more. As long as you have more different types of documents, that's going to serve you a lot better. So hopefully you have that and you're not scrambling at the last minute when you get the interview notice, which typically varies a little bit, but 3 to 4 weeks before the actual date of the interview. And your time then to start finalizing all the documents and putting everything together starts the day you get that interview notice. Okay, you want to be prepared. You do not want to be scrambling. Sometimes it takes time to collect documentation. There's always going to be unforeseen circumstances. Right now we're in a pandemic. Sometimes it takes longer to collect documentation if you need to. So start early, okay, and it won't be that stressful. When it comes to collating the documents, I tell clients this a lot as well. People like to be very organized, and they come with 3-ring binders and plastic sleeves, and they label and tab everything. Don't do that, because it's not going to make it into the file that way. The immigration files are 8.5 by 11, regular size sheet of paper with 2 holes punched on the top. All right. If you want to, you can put in a divider to keep the different types of evidence. So, put in a tab for, cell phone bills, put in a tab for, pictures, etc. you can do that, but everything should fit into an 8.5 by 11. In fact, when we prepare these cases for our clients, we tell our clients to drop everything electronically into a secure folder, and then we stitch everything together and just print it out and hole punch it on top so it can be dropped nicely and easily into the immigration file. Okay. The more staples and paper clips and holes on the side and plastic sleeves you put in, the more time you're going to waste the day of the interview, and the officer might not take everything. And you actually want them to take the documentation that you put in, because especially if you're filing just for a 2-year green card, guess what? That same evidence is going to get looked at 2 years later when you file for your removal of conditions, the I-751, and a year after that when you file for citizenship. So it's really important to try to make sure the best evidence that you put together actually makes it into the file, so that some immigration officer in the future, whenever you're filing for, future applications, can look at those same things and say, hey, this looks like a legitimate case. So like I said, documentation is going to be different. Now, here's one thing that you should be aware of. A lot of clients ask this: what about original documents? Do I need to submit originals? And the answer is, it depends. At our local office, they typically don't ask to see them. If you send copies, then that's fine. Some offices, for example, in New York, always want to see original documents that are actually brought with you to the interview. Now, it just means you have to show it to them. You're not going to actually submit them to the office, but they want to be able to tell that whatever copies of documents you submitted for keeping in the file are actually, copies of original documents. So if you don't have an original document, you need to be prepared to explain why you don't have it, and perhaps the steps you took to try to get it. And usually this happens with birth certificates or old marriage certificates from overseas. It's been compounded, by COVID. It makes it a lot more difficult to get documents. Government offices overseas can be closed. They can't get anything. So you need to be able to show that you at least tried. So certainly something to talk to your attorney about is, what do I do about original documents? Also, reminder, some of you may have filed for a medical exam, which comes in the sealed envelope, the form I-693. That's another form that needs to be, they make sure is submitted by the time of the interview. It's actually not required to be submitted with the filing. And so attorneys have different practices on this. If you do submit it, these days they are valid for quite some time, so that's great. You've gotten it out of the way. But if for whatever reason you have not gotten the medical exam done yet, make sure you get that medical exam in hand, that sealed envelope in hand, before you go to the interview. Okay, otherwise they're going to have to send you a request for evidence and you have to submit it later on, and that can cause delays in your case. So just a reminder about the sealed medical exam. And of course, I'll remind everybody as well, when you get that sealed envelope, please don't open it. It's supposed to remain sealed and can only be opened by the interviewing immigration officer when you get there. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the day of the interview. At most offices now, because of COVID, you will not be allowed into the building more than 15 minutes before. Procedures vary a little bit. Sometimes they'll call you, tell you to wait outside. Sometimes it'll allow you to come in, but you want to get there about 30 minutes before and wait outside and follow whatever their procedure is for entering the building. Going into a federal building is very similar to getting on an airplane. So leave the snacks at home or in the car. Leave the any sharp instruments, that includes nail files, anything that could be used as a weapon, leave that in the car, and don't bring that, and leave all snacks in the car as well. Try to travel light. You are allowed to bring your cell phone in, so you can and should do that. It just has to be on airplane mode so it doesn't ring. And what you're going to want to do is go through security, and then they will direct you to the place where you have to go to wait for the interview. You need to be there on time. Just because you're there on time doesn't mean they have to call you on time, though. So be prepared to wait. Don't schedule anything for later on in the afternoon. like a flight or some important thing, because you won't necessarily be called on time, and you don't want to be stressed out thinking about your future evening commitments while you're at the immigration interview. Give yourself the day off if at all possible. Okay. People will ask sometimes about translators, right? Your spouse whom you're filing for might not be fluent in English. Now, unlike naturalization interviews, which generally must be done in English unless there's an exception that applies, you are allowed to bring a translator for marriage-based interviews, filing for a green card. Now, procedures vary. At our local office in Virginia here, for example, they won't allow interpreters to actually enter the building, and so the officer will actually call them by phone. Some officers have been known to actually utilize government services to provide translation, but you can't bank on that. And again, this is something where local office procedure is going to be paramount. And even if you think you speak English well enough, keep in mind that this is going to be just you and your spouse, perhaps your attorney, in front of an immigration officer. You want to make sure that you're as comfortable as possible. So if your English is okay, but you still would feel better doing the interview and answering the questions in your native language, don't give yourself the stress. It's not going to impress the officer if you do it in English. They want to get it done, and they want to make sure that the answers are accurate. So, and that you're as comfortable as possible. So don't give yourself the extra stress. And if you think you might benefit from an interpreter, then arrange to have that done. And again, check with the local office to find out what the local procedure is for interpreters. Once you go in, this is what we call a non-adversarial interview. All right. It's not a hearing in the sense of there's going to be, there's no government attorney or a judge or a prosecutor or something like that. It's just an interviewer behind a desk who's going to ask you a bunch of questions. Usually most spouses are interviewed together. On occasion, they will separate you and do one and then the other and see how well your answers match up. That's called a Stokes interview, and you want to be prepared for it either way. And you'll start by, even before you sit down, by the officer will ask you to raise your right hand and swear that everything that you're told that you're going to say is the truth and nothing but the truth, under penalty of perjury. You're going to want to give your original documents then. If you're the foreign national applying for the green card, you want to bring your work permit if you've received it, and all of your passports. Bring all your passports, even the canceled ones. Okay, it's just a safer rule of thumb to do that. And if you have it, a state ID or driver's license. And here's another point: before your interview, you want to try to make sure that your driver's license or state ID matches the address, that the addresses match with those of your spouse. All right. So if you've been delaying and you moved in from a different state and you're still driving on your out-of-state license, or if you moved recently and you haven't bothered to update your address with your Department of Motor Vehicles or DMV, you want to make sure you get that taken care of. And hopefully this is something your attorney will have gone over with you at the beginning of the case, because I know these days how hard it is to get an appointment at the DMV or MVA to update that license. But things usually go a lot more smoothly if both of your addresses match. Okay, so try to get that done as best you can beforehand. If not, you're going to have to explain why your addresses don't match. So keep that in mind. Now, most of the time, keep in mind this interview is actually two different interviews at the same time, or two different cases. It's the I-130 petition filed by the U.S. citizen or green card holding sponsor or petitioner, and it's the green card application filed by the foreign national. And here's where procedures vary. Sometimes officers will simply ask questions and let either of you answer them. Sometimes what they're supposed to do is go do the I-130 first, which is the petition, and then the green card application. So do one and then the other. But frequently it gets mixed up and questions might be posed. You'll know when the officer is asking. Sometimes they'll talk to one spouse and say, hey, tell me your other spouse's date of birth. And they'll actually ask and direct who they want to answer the question. But as long as you're prepared, as long as you know your own story, right? I keep saying this, as long as you know your own story, you should be fine. These are easy questions. You should already know them. And don't get too caught up on trying to memorize lists of questions that might be asked. We ourselves, when I first started practicing, used to give lists of questions like this, and I stopped for the simple reason that clients would then start preparing only those questions, and if something was asked that was not on that list, then they would freeze up. So I think it's better practice to empower my client to feel like, hey, you know what? I know my own story. I've got nothing to be ashamed of. I can show that my marriage is bona fide because I know what it is, and I've done my preparation, and I have the documents, and I have my lawyer here with me. I'm going to be fine. And as long as you stick to your own story, you're not going to get tripped up. All right. So usually the questions, at least at our local office, tend to be, how did you all meet? How long have you known each other? If you got introduced to each other, who was that person? So it is a good idea in the individual prep sessions that I do with my clients to listen to each side tell their story, right? Because if I can ask one spouse and then ask the other spouse to tell the story in their own words, we can see how well those stories actually match up, right? We want to make sure, for example, if one spouse says, yeah, we met at a social gathering, and the other spouse said, no, a friend of ours introduced us, right? And this actually happened in a real case of mine years ago. And the officer said, well, it sounds like you two were saying two different things. Well, no, it was a friend at that party, at that social gathering, who had introduced the two of them. So they were both telling the truth. They just described it in a different way. So again, during the prep session, individual prep session with your lawyer, you want to go through these, tell the story of how you all met, and how you all decided to get married, in order to make sure that you know what your spouse is actually going to say. One question I get a lot: what about people who are in arranged marriages, or arranged by the parents or by a community member? Or what if you come from a religious background or cultural background that frowns upon dating, or living together before getting married, etc.? Again, immigration officers are trained to and have actually dealt with people from around the world. Okay, whatever you think is unique about your situation, more likely than not, the immigration officer has probably seen it. So has your lawyer. All right. So once again, do not try to tell the officer something you think they want to hear, or presume that they're not going to understand where it is that you're coming from. Right. Do not be afraid of your own story, and do not be afraid to tell them what your own story is. So once you go through, they'll ask these questions. Sometimes they go into more detail. They might ask about the layout of your house, to see whether or not you all are going to describe your home, or things that you do together. Who does the cooking? Who pays the bills? Whose name is it in? What are the work hours? Who gets up first in the morning? These are all relatively common questions. But I have noticed, if you're able to tell confidently what your own story is about how you met and how you actually live your life, that usually shuts off further inquiry. Sometimes officers will ask more things, and you can't stop that. And that's not necessarily a sign that something's wrong, but you do want to make sure, like I said, as long as you stick to your own story, you should be fine. Towards the end of the interview, officers will ask for the bona fides, which is a term we use for all of those papers, the joint bills and bank statements and pictures and social media screenshots and trips and everything that we talked about before. Ask you to submit those. Some officers will want you to actually walk them through and explain each one to them, which honestly I think is a great opportunity for you all to talk about your lives together. So don't be afraid of that. And if you've done well and spent some time putting your package together, and your documents together, it's going to be a pleasure to talk about your lives together. So, give yourself that opportunity to do that by being prepared. Okay. Some officers might not even ask for it, right? They might not even ask for it. So things do vary, but you want to make sure that you have it in case you need it, and you probably will. Some officers might ask for that documentation up front. Some might do it towards the end. Some might do it in the middle. You want to make sure that it's ready. And you want to have your original documents if you're in an office that insists on seeing or checking original documents. You want to have those separate to be able to show the officer, hey, here are the originals of a marriage certificate, birth certificate, etc. And here's your copy, right? Don't try to submit anything that's already been submitted before. For example, we tend to front load our cases with a lot of evidence from the very beginning. And so we focus for the interview on things that have happened in our clients' lives since the time of filing up until the time of the interview, which might be 10 months, 12 months, 16 months, 17 months, whatever it is, to show updated information. Towards the end of the interview, there are what we call the eligibility questions. You should review them before the interview on Form I-485. And there are all the questions like, are you here to overthrow the government of the United States? Have you ever worked in a jail or a prison? Have you ever been arrested? What's your immigration history look like? It's a bunch of yes or no questions that start on about halfway through Form I-485. So especially if your English is not that great, you want to make sure that you have those questions read out to you in your own native language, so that you understand what it is that they're asking about. Some officers will skip around and only ask a few of those questions. Others will do what they're actually supposed to do and go through and ask every single one. And there's a lot of them. So be prepared when those questions are asked. Let the officer ask the question, complete it, and then give your answer. Hopefully it's no for most of those questions, and move on. You don't get any extra credit for explaining why it's bad to overthrow the government of the United States. Just say no, move on. All right. And towards, like I said, at the very end of the interview, the officer might ask if you have anything else that you want to say. Don't feel pressured to say anything. Usually, depending on the kind of officer you get and what their workload is, they may potentially approve it, in front of you, but that's actually pretty rare these days because they have to do additional rounds of security checks and whatnot. So don't expect to actually get an answer the day of your interview. However, in our experience, most cases wind up going through anywhere from a week to 4 weeks after the interview, and you'll get a welcome notice in the mail if everything goes well that says, welcome to the United States of America. Your physical green card will be mailed to you. If you were married for less than 2 years on the date that your I-485 green card application was approved, then the green card you get will be a 2-year green card, which operates just like a permanent 10-year green card, except it has a condition attached to it. That condition is that in the 90-day period prior to its expiration, you have to file a joint petition with your spouse known as Form I-751. And a 751 is very important. Do not let that deadline slide. Remember, you can't file it any earlier than 1 year and 9 months after you get the 2-year green card, and it must be filed before that green card expires. Otherwise, your status terminates, you get put in removal proceedings, and you might have to start some portion of the process over again. And you don't want to get put into immigration court if you can help it. So just keep in mind that if however the interview is the actual green card approval date is after your 2nd anniversary from your legal marriage date, then you will get the full 10-year green card. If for whatever reason, because this happens commonly too, they mess up and give you a 10-year green card when they were supposed to have given you a 2-year green card, then you still have to fix that problem. Do not think, oh, they messed up and I got benefit out of it and I'm okay now. I don't have to file a 751. Yes, you do. All right. And if you miss filing it, the fact that USCIS messed up and gave you a 10-year green card is not a defense for not filing a 751. So make sure you take care of that if there is an error on how a case needs to be, if there's an error on the green card that you get. All right. So keep in mind also, if you're married to a U.S. citizen, you're allowed to file for naturalization at the 2-year and 9-month mark. Certainly take a look at our video on preparing for your naturalization exam. But we're just about out of time. So I want to thank you all. Make sure you take this advice to heart. Talk to your attorney about local office procedure and things that are specific to your case. And thank you so much for your time and attention today.